With all of the changes going from one administration to the other, from Trump to Biden, none may be as stark as a change when it comes to foreign policy. Take our relationship with Russia, for example. Here's President Biden sounding, well, a lot different than we've heard a president talk for the past 4 years.
We are very concerned about their behavior, whether it's Navalny, whether it's the solar winds, or whether it's reports of bounties on the heads of Americans in Afghanistan. I've asked the agencies in question to do a thorough read for me on every one of those issues, to update me precisely where they are, and I will not hesitate to raise those issues with the Russians.
But Putin and our relationship with Russia is just one aspect of foreign policy worth watching closely. There's our increasingly fraught relationship with China, economically, militarily, and technologically. The Trump administration tried to hurry out an exodus out of Afghanistan amid fears that it could return to chaos if the U.S. leaves completely. Our relationship with Iran, the nuclear deal, but also their roles as it relates to terrorism and the wider Middle East. And don't forget, nothing really has changed between the U.S. and North Korea, despite the Trump-Kim bromance the former administration was keen to present. For more, let's bring in Michael O'Hanlon now. Michael, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution specializing in defense and foreign policy. And, you know, Michael, I remember when the president's team vis-a-vis COVID came in and they said, my God, if not the cupboard bare here, the lack of coordination, stunning. From people you know that are coming into the State Department, what is the situation they're inheriting and what are they hearing from world capitals? Is it as disturbing as we imagined after the last 4 years? Or is it, you know, yeah, you change the deck chairs, but in the end, it's not that different?
Greetings, and nice to be with you. You know, I think let's start with Russia, as you did. And on Russia, there's no doubt that President Biden has a much different tone than President Trump. No nostalgia or, you know, bromance with Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, in a way, Donald Trump didn't really make Russia policy the last 4 years. A bipartisan consensus in the U.S. Congress and within his own administration really prevented him from relaxing any kinds of restrictions, restraints, sanctions, or any kind of toughness on Moscow. And so we had a policy that remained pretty bipartisan and almost slightly separate from what the president of the United States himself seemed to prefer in his gut. So in that sense, it's not so clear where Biden goes to change things. And frankly, if you listen to the clip you just played of President Biden, you know, he was saying he would raise issues. Well, like you said, he already did. Okay, what do you do next after you've raised them? Do you toughen sanctions? Do you try to dream up some new concept for European security that will perhaps defuse some of the tensions with Moscow? You know, do you end NATO expansion if Russia behaves better in Ukraine? That's the kind of concept that I'd like to see us discuss, but I haven't seen that yet from the Biden team. I think there are some places where no doubt Biden coming in makes things dramatically different overnight, like the way we get along with the allies in Europe, the way we talk about our allies, the solidarity we project with allies. That's already changed for the better. But some of those allies are still going to wonder. And I think many allies are still going to have big questions, not so much about Tony Blinken or Joe Biden, but about the United States and who we are and what we are at our core and what we might do in the future beyond the next 4 years. That would be my overall reaction to your questions.
You know, in listing some of the troubled nations, which hopefully I hit on off the top, there was also what you laid out. You said, listen, there's biological weapon concern, of course, as we're living through pandemics right now, nuclear concerns, and then climate and other concerns. But to me, staying on climate and even with the digital concerns, I was just thinking a couple items I saw in the news. GM deciding to go all electric by 2035 in many ways. That could be more substantive than even us rejoining the Paris Accords, okay? Because industry will drive this. And then if people saw 60 Minutes last night, what the Chinese are trying to do, and in some ways succeeding in doing, in acquiring all of our personal data, including our biological data, if American corporations can somehow, and this is dangerous when you're having government get involved in private business, but if through business, Biden can kind of drive agendas, then maybe in some ways we can expedite the process instead of through traditional channels. I think of conversations you and I have had over the better part of a decade. It seems to me, Michael, that there may be different pathways to get to the end game that we didn't do before. And given how big so many of these conglomerations are, maybe you include them.
Yeah, I think you're hitting things right on the money, because what you're basically saying is that there are forces that on some issues are bigger than government. And, that's sort of as it should be, right? I mean, government is operating within certain parameters, obviously makes huge decisions on matters of war and peace, regulation, economic distribution, et cetera. But what drives economic growth fundamentally is innovation, technology, business decision. And the only way GM can really do what you said by 2035 is if the technology permits it. GM's not going to do that and just take it on the chin and be willing to lose money in order to satisfy some agenda item that a certain fraction of the country supports, because GM's got to worry fundamentally about staying afloat financially. They don't necessarily have to maximize, shareholder value, but they do need to make money. And so if Mary Barra of GM is saying what she is about 2035 and electric vehicles, she thinks it's possible to do it, and to do it well. And maybe giving a little bit of impetus from her chair increases the likelihood of more charging stations and, ongoing federal subsidies for some kinds of research and battery technology, whatever little bit of help she needs. But basically, it's her engineers and other engineers around the world who have made this possible, not Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or anybody else operating in glitzy capitals and having big multilateral meetings or signing treaties. In fact, even under Trump, we pulled out of Paris, but I think U.S. emissions kept going down. So that was a reflection of improvements in technology.
In terms, Michael, of our footprint in the Middle East, we know what the previous administration believed. We know traditionally what people said, you need to have some presence there. And if you do an expedited exit, you're asking for a lot of trouble. But what do you foresee our role in the next 4 years being, for example, in Afghanistan?
I think in Afghanistan, we need to stay put, or at least be prepared and expecting to stay put, because the peace talks are likely to take at least 4 years. We know historically that peace talks often take many years. Rarely have I seen peace talks begin with two parties so diametrically opposed, not only on the substance of specific issues, but even on each other's legitimacy. And so I would expect the talks will completely break down at least once. I would expect that in the meantime, the war will continue. And therefore, I think the United States and NATO need to keep modest forces there indefinitely to be sure that the Taliban don't get the wrong idea, because right now the Taliban think they can outweight us. And they think that the accord signed last February by the Trump administration and the Taliban commits us to leave Afghanistan with all U.S. and NATO forces by this May. As long as the Taliban operate under that kind of misconception, they will consider themselves to have the upper hand even more than they did previously. So we're going to have to readjust their expectations. And we're also going to have to pressure the Afghan government to be willing to compromise on some issues. And I think this process is virtually guaranteed to take many years in a best case.
Michael O'Hanlon, as always, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And up next, it may be the one defense that Donald Trump shouldn't try in his upcoming impeachment trial. Word that the former president wants to relitigate his election fraud claims as his defense, even though everybody tells him not to do it. We'll explain why so many experts say this could be really dangerous, not just legally, but politically. Stay with us.